There's the thing called the ephod. It's like a big blue apron that he wears. And in it are 2 special stones with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So he's wearing something that reminds him of who he represents. Then he has a little pouch called the pectoral seat of judgment, and in it he's got the sacred dice, the Urim and Tumim. Now, this sounds odd to us, but they said a prayer when they didn't know what to do, and they threw the dice, the Urim and Tumim, and allowed God to see how it falls. So they were probably a very simple thing. It was either yes or no sort of thing. We don't know too much about it though. But certainly as we move on from the time of Moses to the Second Temple, those sort of things aren't as practiced then. They're looked upon more as magic as we go further on. Finally, he has a big violet robe with bells in it at the bottom and pomegranates. That's a bit odd, isn't it? Well, the bells evidently you can hear from outside, and that reminds people that the high priest is moving in or out of the sanctuary. And finally, he's got a turban or a diadem, and in it too, he's got reminders of God's people. So that's a little bit about the clothing, the vestments, and we don't understand a lot about it, but they're meant to, because the high priest is representing the people, they're meant to remind him and the people that something significant is happening. The great meeting is taking place between the people's representative and God. In fact, as we know, this is sometimes called the tent of meeting, because that's where God meets with his people through the medium of the high priest. And then the final thing I just want to say, we've talked a little bit about the layout of the sanctuary, a little bit about the vestments, and now the final thing is to say, it's talk about the different sacrifices that are made when the high priest is ordained, or at certain times in the year, what sacrifices he's meant to make. Some of them, the sacrifice is burnt. For example, the first ram is just burnt wholly. The second ram, a little bit of the blood's put on his right ear, on his right toe, and his vestments. It's a bit odd, isn't it? But it's a significance of blood, you see. Blood is the source of life, and that's reminding a little bit of life. And then the high priest can eat, and the other priest can eat some of this. So it's a communion sacrifice. They're communing with God through eating, as well as being purified and consecrated with the blood. And then there's talk about the atonement sacrifice for sins. So I'll just go a bit later on sacrifice, but just to mention that's a big part of all this. Because when we talk about priesthood, a word we often use with that is sacrifices. And I should just add, of course, we end with the Sabbath. And for the priestly school, the Sabbath is the great sign of the covenant with Moses. Just as the sign of the covenant with Noah was the rainbow, the sign of the covenant with Abraham was circumcision, so the sign of God's covenant with Moses and his people is the Sabbath. That's how every week we remind ourselves of God, by keeping the Sabbath, by honouring the Sabbath. Now, if I could just spend a few moments and talk a little bit about 2 terms, the term holiness and the term sacrifice. Those 2 terms are very dear to these chapters. They're very dear to the priestly school. And so just like to say a little bit about what they mean. One of the meanings of the word holy is to be separate from the profane. The holy is dedicated to God. It's given to God. It's not for ordinary everyday use. It's put aside for God. That's one special meaning. And so the sacrifices that will be used are put aside to honour God. And if we're holy for God. Not for secular use so much, but for God. With the word holy too is a sense of awe, a sense of deep respect and reverence. There are feelings within us when we think about God which engender that a great sense of mystery, great sense of awe, great sense of being in the presence of the extraordinary God of the universe. That's a sense of holiness as well. But the third sense I want to spend just a tiny bit of time on. Holiness also means wholesomeness. A complete thing, something that's integrated within itself. And God is complete, God is totally integrated, God is totally beautiful, God is perfect, God is complete. And so if we want to be holy, we have to sort of remind ourselves of, with the use of created things, of what God is like. And that's why in the Jewish world, which to us it seems strange, there's a whole set of rules of what makes us pure or impure. It's got nothing to do with sexuality, really. It's got to do with those things which have a sense of completion or wholeness, and those things which aren't. And it's by using those things which are complete and whole and integrated, and by being that ourselves, we can't, if we're dissimulating, if we're telling fibs or something, we're not complete, we're not whole. So the whole sense in this book, but especially in the book of Leviticus, of all those rules and regulations, has to be seen in the symbolic universe that the Jewish people were. Our symbolic universe is totally different, so we don't understand it. But we have our own universe, which makes sense to us. But behind all these rules, and I've got a fantastic book, and if you ever get a chance to read it, the wonderful Mary Douglas, Purity and Danger, an analysis of the concepts of pollution and taboo. Fantastic. And of course she was a strong practicing Catholic, and she's really helps us to understand the book of Leviticus and the whole priestly school and their understanding of why they have these rules of purity. It stops us from being disintegrated, from feeling chaotic. It gives us a sense of being with the God of order and the God who is whole and complete and wholesome. Now, the second concept I want to just spend a few moments on is sacrifice. Now, when you think of sacrifice, what do you reckon? What are you thinking of? You don't need to answer. But it's a good word. If you look at what it really means, it is sacrum facere, to make holy. Sacrifice means to make holy. Now, the other beautiful book I have by a fabulous Scottish theologian, Scottish Church, The Power of Sacrifice, he's got a few wonderful things about the power of sacrifice. And in it he says this, look, the word sacrifice in our language means always losing something, being deprived of something. But in Latin, and in Greek and Hebrew and Slavonic, in all the ancient languages, sacrifice comes from the word sacred. It means to make something sacred, make something holy and not lose it. Indeed, when you bring a life to God or a gift to God, it becomes God's. It's no longer yours in the greedy and possessive sense of the word, but it becomes holy with the holiness of God. It's very beautiful, really, because